How did a pocket-sized board change the way we look at computers and help over 70 million users bring their projects to life? To understand this, we need to go back, way back, when computers were everywhere, but understanding them was rare. In the early 2000s, something strange was happening. Universities began noticing a problem. Students enrolling in computer science and engineering could use computers, but they didn't understand them. The machines had become appliances. Inside universities like Cambridge, this problem became impossible to ignore. Engineers and educators, many of whom would later form the Raspberry Pi Foundation, saw a generation growing up fluent in software interfaces, but disconnected from the machine underneath. One engineer in particular felt this gap deeply. Eben Upton had grown up in an era where computers invited experimentation, where breaking things was part of learning. So, to rekindle his passion as a maker, in 2006 he started a hobby project of building a small 8-bit computer on a PCB. This computer ran on an AVR chips with just 512 kilobytes of static RAM. Its graphics were basic, and it didn't even have an operating system. The system was bulky, performance was tight, and scaling it into something practical didn't really make sense. While working at Broadcom, Upton saw a system on chips designed for phones and media players. Compact, powerful, and built to handle graphics and video as a baseline. They were clearly better suited for the kind of computer he had in mind. But the problem was access. Those chips weren't meant for individuals or small projects. Getting hold of them in useful quantities wasn't realistic. So, at that point, he did not work on the prototype further, and the idea was put aside. In 2008, the question returned, this time from Cambridge. The University of Cambridge was looking for ways to spark interest in computing and hardware among incoming students. Because of the work he'd already done, Upton was a natural fit for the team. Between 2008 and 2011, the project restarted with a different foundation, to create a mini replica of the BBC Micro. But the big question was, how do you actually build a computer like this? A real, fully functional computer. For Eben Upton and his team, the design had to satisfy 4 requirements at the same time. Missing even one would undermine the entire idea. First, it had to be affordable. The team initially settled on a target price of $25, roughly the cost of a textbook. That figure immediately constrained every other decision that followed. Second, it had to be programmable hardware. A real computer, capable of running a full operating system, connecting to networks, and interacting directly with hardware. For this, the team turned to mobile-class system-on-chips. This led to the creation of the first Broadcom chip that used an ARM processor. It was efficient, widely available, and produced at a massive scale. Running Linux added another layer of complexity. Because a full operating system demanded memory, storage, and reliable driver support, it was difficult to achieve it within the cost target. Now, if the goal is to teach how computers actually work, the hardware cannot be hidden. General-purpose I/O pins were essential. USB mattered. Video output mattered. But every port added cost, every connector increased complexity, and removing any of them risked breaking the purpose of the machine itself. Third, it had to be fun. This idea came directly from the 1980s BBC Micro, a computer that drew people in through games, then quietly introduced them to programming. Raspberry Pi was designed with that same spirit. Not as a lesson plan, but as something people wanted to spend time with. Curiosity did the teaching. And finally, it had to be robust. This computer wasn't meant for a desk that never changed. It was meant to be carried, unplugged, reconnected, and reused again and again. Before we move forward, a word from our sponsor. If you're working on electronics projects, you know how important it is to have an ECAD environment that keeps your designs organized and reliable. A good workflow should offer clear version control, rule-based checks, real-time collaboration, and visibility into component availability so you can move from concept to a manufacturable board with fewer mistakes. That's the approach Altium focuses on, helping engineers maintain consistency and manage their projects more efficiently. And for students who want to learn these skills early, there's Altium Student Lab. It's a free learning program that introduces professional design workflows through guided lessons, a cloud workspace, collaboration tools, and certification. To get more details, visit the link in the description. By May 2011, the team had built a working prototype. It looked more like a USB stick than a computer, very different from the credit card-sized board we know today. Inside, it had an ARM processor with 128 megabytes of RAM. There was an HDMI port on one end, a USB port on the other, an SD card reader on the side, and a camera expansion port on top. It even included a GPU and could run an operating system. In terms of performance, it already matched early Raspberry Pi standards. To spread the word about the board, the team reached out to Rory Sellon-Jones, a former BBC journalist. He shot a quick video of David Barbin, the founding member of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, holding the device and explaining how it could help young enthusiasts. He later shared the video on his blog. Within days, both the video and the post saw a huge surge in traffic. People loved the concept, and every tech enthusiast wanted to get their hands on one. Till this point, the project was just an experiment, but after that response, it became a real commitment. So by second quarter of 2011, the team had produced and tested a small batch of fully functional alpha boards. These boards were roughly 20% larger than the final credit card-sized form factor. It consists of Broadcom system on chip and 256 megabytes of RAM. It had a USB hub and an Ethernet controller. It could run Linux and was powerful enough to run Quake 3 Arena, as you can see in this video. Each board cost around $110 to make, way higher than the targeted $35 mark. So Pete Lomas, the hardware designer for the Pi, modified the design to keep the cost low, and by the end of 2011, the team had a simple 3-chip design, along with power circuits and connectors, all fitted onto a credit card-sized board. In December 2011, the team announced they had received 100 beta boards from the factory. The foundation never planned to sell these beta boards, but they auctioned 10 of them to raise money. The auctions began on December 31st, 2011, and every unit sold for a high price. Together, the 10 boards raised over £16,000, with the highest single bid reaching £3,500. On February 29, 2012, the first Raspberry Pi Model B officially launched at $35. As soon as it went live, demand exceeded expectations almost immediately. The two authorized distributors, Premier Farnell and RS Components, experienced heavy traffic as orders arrived from around the world. Their websites slowed and, in some cases, became temporarily unavailable under the load. Initial batches sold out quickly. Pre-orders reached into the tens of thousands within the first day. Behind the scenes, the focus shifted rapidly from development to production. Meeting demand required stabilizing the hardware, securing component supply, and scaling manufacturing. At first, the units were built in factories in China, but production soon moved closer to home, to Sony Europe BV's UK Technology Center. Being able to visit the factory made it easier to see the process firsthand. And with automation handling the work, costs stayed to a minimum. The Raspberry Pi did not ship with an operating system installed. Users were free to choose, and several options appeared early on. A Debian-based distribution, later known as Raspbian, emerged as the most practical choice, having been optimized to take advantage of the board's hardware. It soon became the recommended operating system, shaping how most people experienced the device. Before 2012, if you were a maker, you were caught between two extremes. You had the Arduino, which was excellent for simple hardware toggling but couldn't handle a webcam, a database, or a web browser. On the other end, you had industrial single-board computers that cost hundreds of dollars and came with almost no community support. The Raspberry Pi sat right in the middle. It was a full Linux machine that could be powered by a standard micro USB cable. This utility triggered a massive wave of documentation. Because the hardware was standardized and cheap, for the first time in history, millions of people were working on the exact same engine. If someone figured out how to interface the Pi with a specific type of medical sensor or a vintage high-end camera, they posted the code online. That code worked for everyone else too. The home lab went from being a luxury for professional sysadmins to something a hobbyist could set up on a bookshelf. People began building Pi holes to block ads across their entire home network. They built personal cloud servers to take their data back from big tech companies. They built magic mirrors that used the Pi to overlay weather and news onto two-way glass. In the world of robotics, the Pi became the go-to brain. It was small enough to fit on a drone and powerful enough to run computer vision scripts that could track objects in real time. The most significant change, however, was the death of the fear of breaking things. In traditional engineering, mistakes are expensive. But with the Pi, the software lived on a removable SD card. If you corrupted the entire operating system, which almost every beginner did, you didn't have to call tech support. You just wiped the card and started over. This encouraged a trial and error workflow that is the bedrock of real engineering. People started moving from following tutorials to writing their own libraries. They were learning Linux, Python, and hardware debugging, not because they were studying for an exam, but because they wanted their project to work. The Raspberry Pi turned the Internet of Things from a corporate buzzword into a localized reality. It proved that if you give people a reliable, affordable tool, they will build things the original designers never even imagined. As the years went by, the Raspberry Pi started to outgrow its own name. It was being pushed into environments that would have seemed impossible back in 2012. First, the team went small. They released the Pi Zero. It was a $5 computer the size of a stick of gum. This was a turning point because it turned computing into a component. It was so small and so cheap that you could embed it inside a project and forget about it. It became the brain of smart doorbells, wearable tech, and tiny drones. For the price of a coffee, you could add a Linux-grade brain to literally anything. But then, the community started asking for the opposite. They wanted power. When the Raspberry Pi 4 hit the scene, the conversation changed. Suddenly you had 8 gigs of RAM and dual monitor support. People weren't just asking if it was a good learning tool anymore. They were asking if it could be their only desktop. For students in developing nations, the answer was yes. It stopped being a toy and started being a primary gateway to the internet. Then came a different kind of expansion. With the Raspberry Pi Pico, the Foundation entered the microcontroller space by designing its own silicon. Unlike the main Raspberry Pi boards, the Pico didn't run Linux. It executed code directly on the hardware. That made it suitable for timing-critical tasks, low-power systems, and applications where an operating system would be unnecessary overhead. It extended the ecosystem downward, not upward. And then there was the compute module. This was the Foundation's pro move. It took the guts of a Pi and put them on a tiny card meant to be plugged into industrial machinery. This meant an engineer could prototype a factory controller on a standard Pi and then move straight into mass production using the exact same code. Through all of this, from the Pi 1 to the Pi 5, the Foundation did something almost unheard of in tech. They kept the DNA the same. The GPIO pins stayed in the same place. The software remained compatible. The skills you learned in 2012 on a sluggish single-core board still worked on the lightning-fast hardware of today. They didn't just iterate on a product. They built a stable platform. So this was the story of Raspberry Pi. How a low-cost computer built for education grew into a platform used far beyond the classroom. On that note, I'd like to quote Steve Jobs. Everyone should learn how to program a computer because it teaches you how to think.